many syndromes, medical syndromes that exist, but I think there's one that's been existing in our country and maybe in parts of the world as well, I don't know. But I want to talk about this new syndrome which has existed for the longest time, and it's about time that we start to acknowledge it and address it. I'm talking about an MIS. It's a mother-in-law syndrome. Through this video, I have nothing against women and men. I have nothing against mother-in-laws and father-in-laws. I just want to point out that over the last 8 years, with over 6,000 hours of consulting, why does it keep coming up that the amount of emotional stress that a lot of women go through, which leads to their diseases, which becomes an obstacle to their healing, which robs them of their happiness, makes them slip into depression, revolves around the mother-in-law relationship. So I call it the MIS, mother-in-law syndrome, because it is a syndrome. There are thousands and thousands of women out there suffering. Okay, before people jump on me and say, why are you only talking about the mother-in-law syndrome? Is there a father-in-law syndrome? Yes, but I've hardly really heard about it. This is not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about talking about facts. There are father-in-laws who create problems with their daughter-in-laws, with their sons, not supporting the right behaviors, using ego, using pride, using caste, using color to differentiate between them, to make them feel little, comparing them with other families based on the status of wealth and all of that stuff. Yes, it exists, but what I'm talking about is the mother-in-law syndrome, which is unbelievably present in urban India. Educated families that have studied abroad and universities in the US and London and all of that stuff, they come back, and this relationship that they develop with their daughters, their daughter-in-laws, somehow leads to the worst health conditions that we've seen. Because when we break down cancer cases, we break down cases of diabetes, thyroid, chronic fatigue syndromes, all of these issues, obesity, gaining weight, we always ask about relationships, we ask about stress, emotional levels, chronic stress, and the amount of data that comes out over the last years where most of the stress is caused by the mother-in-law. So let's break it down. We don't have to make the mother-in-law look like a witch. Absolutely not. But what is the problem? The problem, is it a gap? Is it a generation gap? Is it the fact that the mother-in-law finds it difficult to let go of control, to accept a new woman in the family? A lot of the MIS syndrome women I see are very, very attached to their sons for all the right reason. But once your son's a grown man, you can't be his mummy all the time. You can be his mummy to be there for him, but you can't control your son. A lot of sons out there are so scared of their mothers that they will not even acknowledge their own wife's problems, which are caused by the mother-in-law. So now the wife feels unsupported. The wife feels alone and left to battle their own problems because she doesn't even get the help of her own husband. I'm not here, of course, sometimes there are daughter-in-laws who behave the wrong way and they do stuff which requires the mother-in-law to get in and address it better in an assertive way and a very civilized way, rather than trying to make the daughter-in-law feel alienated, comparing the daughter-in-law's family with their family, putting them down, ridiculing them, trying to show that they are in a position of power compared to the new daughter-in-law. And like I said, the sad part of this is it happens in urban India, in educated families. So this makes me think that the MIS syndrome is linked, number one, to pride and ego. Number two, with the inability to let go of control, the inability to learn acceptance. But my point is, if you are going to create problems for your daughter-in-law, which in turn is going to create problems for your whole family, why aren't you all vocal about this before your son gets married to that woman? Okay, why aren't you all vocal about that? And at the same time, all the daughter-in-laws, it's so important for you. Yes, you've fallen in love with your husband, you're blindly in love, and when we fall blindly in love, we can't see clearly because of the amount of chemical reactions happening, the amount of oxytocin and the endorphins. That's good. Don't rush into it. Step back. Let the chemicals settle down. If you are planning to marry and get into an entire family, you also want to know about your mother-in-law, about everyone in that family that you are now going to be moving into. Whether it's acceptance, and the moment you see the slightest problem, of course the advice is don't do it. Do it if you have a supportive husband. Do it if your husband is going to be man enough to stand up and say that, hey mom, you're wrong. Okay, hey mom, you need to treat my wife with respect. Hey mom, this behavior, I'm sorry, we cannot tolerate this thing. Then go ahead and do it because you have someone fighting for you. But if you're blindly falling in love and you're moving into a family which already has a mother-in-law syndrome, it's a big problem. Okay, to be fair, even if it has a father-in-law syndrome. It is so important for men to understand this as well, because your life and your married life also gets messed up if you get caught in between your mother and your wife. So it's so important for you to understand that once the hormones settle down and the chemicals kind of get back into balance, you need to start asking yourself tough questions about whether this relationship can actually work out with your family dynamics. Or, like a lot of families, maybe you have to make the decision to break away from that joint family if it's not conducive for your relationship. And maybe start a nuclear family if you think it can work. But you need to understand, for your own peace, for your own peace of mind, you need to start working at a higher level of understanding, because the mother-in-law syndrome exists. It is real. The father-in-law syndrome is real, but to be fair, I like to stock data. Most of the cases revolve around the mother-in-law syndrome, where the daughters are terrorized, they can't sleep at night, they don't feel accepted. Imagine being in a relationship where you don't feel accepted. Imagine being in a relationship where you don't feel a sense of belonging. Forget about love, forget about sex, that's one part of it. But we know that human relationships are bonded and they grow stronger when you have a sense of belonging, when you have a sense of being accepted. That is so important for you to understand. So yes, I put MIS as a condition that affects health, mental, emotional, and physical, that has a connection. I have cancer patients who have broken out of their joint families only to get better, and they've gotten better. You should see how their blood parameters change when they are in a toxic environment and when they're out of it. It's as simple as that. You take a healthy plant that needs sunlight for growth and you put it in darkness. What happens? The plant begins to die. Why? Wrong environment. You take that plant and you put it back in sunlight, it thrives. So yes, I have nothing against women. I have nothing against mother-in-laws. What I'm trying to say is there is a mother-in-law syndrome that exists. Okay, and that has to be broken down. It is unfair. It is unfair that it happens, and you got to be smart enough to probe and find out, will you be a subject or will you be a victim of MIS when you choose to get into that relationship or that marriage? And everyone has a role to play. I understand it from the mother-in-law side as well. Yes, you're giving up your daughter, your son to someone else. You've been the perfect mother, now you expect the daughter to be the perfect mother as well. Don't have expectations. It's never going to work out that way. Instead, nurture. When the daughter-in-law comes in, nurture them, help them, make them part of the family. They will thrive better rather than you trying to show your control and your power as the mother-in-law. This is a syndrome that we have to accept because it is going to impact the lives of several, mental and physical and emotional, of several young girls out there and guys as well. Because like I said, if you have an unhappy wife because of the mother-in-law, how can you be happy as a man as well? How can your children be happy and in a happy environment when they constantly see the friction that's happening in your family? It's up to you to fix it. Everyone has an excuse or a choice. And sometimes the less you stop watching mindless entertainment that only shows you mother-in-law issues and families and positions of power, you need to understand what you watch more of, you become that. And that's not okay because it exists on TV, that you accept it. That's the virtual world. The real world is the world that you can create for your family and for yourself.